Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. I'm Bridget Degnen. I'm the Cook County Commissioner in the 12th District. We are here tonight talking about PPP and SBA loans that are available. I feel like this is such a constantly evolving topic where there's so much new information, and the information we had a few weeks ago is out of date. And so it's really important to stay current. So I'm so excited that we have 3 great people here to talk tonight. I'll let you guys all introduce yourself. It's just a general housekeeping measure. We are recording this and it will be posted on our Facebook page, all of our social medias, and on our website. My website is commissionerdegnen.com. And after the webinar, if you have any questions, please reach out to any of our 4 offices. My email is district12@countyil.gov. And the last piece of housekeeping, happy International Women's Day, everybody. I'm so happy to be celebrating with all of you this evening. So Senator, why don't you start off, and then we'll give it to the representative and then our distinguished Director of Banking.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for inviting me to join you here today. It's a pleasure to be here talking about really what is a very important subject, making sure our businesses have the access to get through this pandemic and stay fiscally sound and have the resources they need to get through to the other side. It feels so good. It feels like we're getting there, but obviously these next few months are critical. So it's important that our businesses have the resources they need. So I'm honored to be here, and I look forward to the discussion so that I can learn more about this important topic as well. If anyone would like to reach out to me, you can find me on the web at senatormartwick.com. You can email me at info@senatormartwick.com. I share an office with Representative LaPointe at 6315 North Milwaukee Avenue, and we're currently not, we're trying to not be open during these times, but we can arrange meetings with you. You can reach my office at 773-286-1115. And of course, you will find me all over social media, so feel free to reach out anytime. And with that, I will turn it over to my partner and colleague in the General Assembly, State Representative Lindsey LaPointe.
Thanks, Senator, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining this virtual event tonight. State Representative Lindsey LaPointe, 19th House District, which covers much of the far northwest side of Chicago, Jefferson Park, Portage Park, Dunning, Gladstone Park, but also some of the suburbs like parts of Norridge, Harwood Heights, Elmwood Park, and even a little bit of River Grove. I'm just so happy to be here tonight with my senator and my county commissioner, and someone we're going to learn a whole lot from. And one of my big takeaways, there's a lot of takeaways from the public health and economic crisis that we have all been living through for more than a year, is that access to accurate information, whether it's about public health or whether it's about economic recovery, is so critical. And now more than ever, it can be difficult to find out where to get information. We all live on smartphones, and social media is not, it can be very useful, but it's not always the best way to get accurate information. And so events like this, where we bring the source to the table to really share the details of how we, either as individuals, families, or businesses, can access the resources that are out there, is key. So just very happy to be here. Thank you, Commissioner Degnen, for convening, and I look forward to learning alongside people so we can all continue to get out accurate information to support people and businesses in our communities.
Great, and thank you, Representative, Senator, Commissioner. My name is Chasse Rehwinkel, and I am the Director of Banking for the state of Illinois. You probably have never interacted with the Director of Banking normally. We regulate the state chartered banking institutions here in the state. There's roughly 300 of them. They go as far as $15 million asset under management to our big friends at Northern Trust that are in the hundreds of billions. We also regulate student loan services and non-bank mortgage lenders, as well as pawnbrokers. We're part of the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, IDFPR, and you can go to idfpr.com, which has all of the different agencies' contact information on if you have any follow-up on this. There's everything from nursing licenses over to us in banking. I will state that our office does interact on the licensing side. We do not do the PPP program, but our institutions, our banking institutions, tend to be on the front lines of this PPP program, which has gotten us really focused on this. And we have partnered with the SBA multiple times to provide some information on this program. If you want to look at some of those past webinars, because this is an ongoing evolving program, you can go on to IDFPR under the coronavirus tab that has the help there. And then lastly, I got to give this, as any other state agency, my views and opinions are my own for this, this presentation and do not reflect IDFPR or Governor Pritzker from Illinois. But very excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Well, I think there's no time like the present to get started. We are going, I think the format that we have set for this evening is something that's worked successfully for us on a lot of these other virtual events. While we can't wait to get to back to in-person events, which I think are a little bit more sparkling and fun, especially with this type of information. The format we're going to use tonight is a round robin where Representative Lindsey LaPointe will ask several questions, followed by myself, and then followed by, last but not least, Senator Rob Martwick. At the end of the questions that we've received, both from constituents and the general questions that we have already circulated, we will then move to any questions in the chat. So if you have questions that you don't hear answers to, please add them to the chat, and then we will be addressing those as well. So Representative LaPointe, why don't you start us off?
Terrific. Thank you, Commissioner. So I'm going to start with a few basic questions to Chase, just to orient us. And we'll start with, how does PPP, which I think a lot of people have just been hearing that, over the last 9 months or so, how does see if I get the acronym right, the Paycheck Protection Program, how does it work?
Great question. And I think we should talk a little bit about the history and why it exists where it is. So the PPP program, or Paycheck Protection Program, is a loan forgiveness model program. So and it works through the Small Business Administration. So it's a federal program that was given federal authority through a series of different actions that we can go over in a second to provide assistance immediately to businesses that were suffering during the pandemic. The idea would be that there would be lending that would go out by financial institutions that could be subject to eligible for forgiveness at a later date. And we'll go over all the different details of that later by the SBA. So in theory, you could take it out as a loan to try to pay for some of those items. And we'll go over again what is eligible in the Paycheck Protection Program and what those expenses should be for. But then you could pay it back normally to a financial institution. Most of these were banks, like a normal loan if you felt you could do that. Or you could wait, and the period was you would file for forgiveness before the end of 10 months. And then you could do a forgiveness program which would forgive the loan and therefore allow for additional respite from any items. So I can kind of go over the timeline of how this worked. So in April 16th, the CARES Act passed with a package of PPP loans. That's when that was first created. That money, which was $349 billion, was gone in 2 weeks, which was crazy. So they opened up PPP for a second round of enhancement, $310 billion. That expired on August 8th. And there was actually some remaining money there, but there was various reasons why that existed. And now they're opening again for a third round. And this third round allows for a couple of things that weren't available in the first round. If you, in the first round and the second round, if you took a PPP loan, you couldn't get a second PPP loan. This allows for, and there are slightly differences in eligibility, this allows for a second draw at the PPP loans. So if people are looking for that, that is where this is currently going. And that all expires. The expiration date currently, and here's what I want to be clear about this whole process, the terms and conditions around PPP change. Sometimes it feels like daily. So be very careful when you're talking to your lender about PPP. Make sure they're talking with the SBA and they're getting the most up-to-date information. Currently, this third round of PPP expires at the end of this month, March, and then we'll get into the forgiveness piece. So that expires on the 31st, and then then we'll see if there's any adjustments or extensions that would have to be through either congressional or some sort of other federal action.
Okay, you are a great explainer, by the way. Thank you. A few follow-up questions, because you mentioned that the deadline for this wave of PPP is the end of March. Can you explain more about the application process? If a business is either getting a first or second PPP loan? Yes.
So as I said, there is a difference this time in that the second PPP loan has, you can get a second round draw. Up until this point, there were different dates that started off when people could take first level or second draw, small business versus smaller business versus slightly larger business. We've kind of hit a lot of those dates. So now it's more into the general request. So I'm going to talk about the eligibility.
Okay.
So eligibility for a first draw PPP loan means you have to have operated as a company before February 15th, 2020. And you can't have more than 500 employees combined with affiliates. There are some slight exceptions there. So make sure you talk to your lender if you feel like you need that for, you meet certain guidelines there, but maybe aren't sure. The second draw, it's the same date as before, although theoretically you would have already hit that in your first round PPP, because if you didn't exist before February 15th, 2020, you were already kind of missing out on some items. But you have to demonstrate at least a 25% reduction in your gross receipts. And then you can't have more than 300 combined employees with affiliates. So those are kind of slightly different moves around that. Now you're both working with your a financial institution to provide that assistance. And let me explain, not all financial institutions are offering PPP. Most likely, your bank that you normally have a banking account with, that you're just your small business checking account and all of that stuff, is probably offering PPP. There are some that offered PPP earlier in the summer, but because they're carrying a large debt load now on their books, they're not as able to meet those PPP lines. That's okay. There are definitely still institutions out there that can do the PPP for you. If you go to the SBA's website, which is sba.gov, there's a PPP tab, and you can actually have there's a lender searching tool, so you can find out where you want. Now, the reason that lending search tool exists in the first place is because originally this third round of PPP went first through CDFIs, which are kind of community-focused financial institutions, so like Axion here in Chicago. or MDIs, which are minority depository institutions. There's 5 of them here in Illinois, and those are majority minority owned. That deadline has since passed, so there's more institutions in this mix, but they built on that so you can kind of look for institutions if your current bank isn't offering PPP.
Excellent. That is so helpful. And I just want to underscore something you said that's really important. And that is, you said that some of the conditions will change. So you, and we're talking about businesses, small businesses, have to be you want to be in high communication with your lender. And just because you hear something 2 weeks ago doesn't mean that the condition that would allow you to apply or not won't change. So thanks for that good guidance. Mm-hmm. Well, I am going to turn it over to Commissioner Degnen to ask some more questions about forgiveness.
Thank you, Representative. So the first question that we have is, how can businesses get their PPP loans forgiven?
So forgiveness, you want to be talking with your financial institution. So you've gotten your PPP loan. They're going to keep you on deadline here because the financial institution themselves is really focused on making sure they've kind of fronted this money, if you think of it, and they're your partner here. They're going to help you get where you need to go, but you want to make sure you're in constant communication with them because there can be, miscommunications, maybe, as things change, you never know. So it's just best to ask more questions and I promise you're not going to bother your financial institution. We've had institutions since this summer that worked 24 hours a day to try to just hit the PPP limit to make sure everybody got what they were going because they realized of how important it was. If you have gotten a PPP loan and you're looking for forgiveness, remember, it's 10 months after. Now, these all can change. Just, again, make sure you're checking with your financial institution after the initial loan. So you want to be that once you get past that deadline, you can't ask for forgiveness anymore. It's just a loan. So you want to make sure that you're talking with your financial institution during that next few weeks period so that you can get forgiveness. Forgiveness comes through, you need to fill out a form, which the SBA has, but your lender is going to have that form for you for how for if you want to record this down. The form is called 3508. There's also 3508 Easy, which is supposed to be a slightly easy version of that form, but your lender's going to know the name of the form and they're going to be able to help you. Just know that that's where you need to go. They're going to ask you for some documentation. They're going to want your payroll. They're going to want non-payroll expenses. That's like mortgage interest payments, business rent, business utilities, all that item so that they can support for hitting that forgiveness for that documentation. Then your lender is going to work through that and they're going to actually fill out the vast majority of that back end, contact the SBA, and then you work towards forgiveness.
So is it 10 months from the date that you filled out your loan application, or is it 10 months from the date that you received the money from the financial institution?
So it's 10 months after the last day of the covered period. So it's like 8 weeks. It gets complicated. So that's why you want to contact your lender. So you have this 8 to 24 week period. Then on the last date of that, you have 10 months to recoup that period. So all I would argue with you on that is you want to make sure that you're contacting with your financial institution to make sure I want to be eligible for forgiveness as soon as possible, or I want to make sure I know my specific window based on when I filed and received my PPP money, and they will give that to you. And if you have any additional constraints on that, the regional SBA office actually will provide further information.
So I think what we're hearing tonight is that you should develop a personal relationship with your financial institution to make sure that you have the phone number and email address so that you document everything. You document your communications so you can go back and take a look at them so that there's no misunderstanding and you don't miss that window. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So is there, wrapped up in this loan forgiveness discussion, is there something that a business can do to maximize their PPP loan forgiveness amount?
Yeah, remember, it's not just payroll that is covered here, and you want to make sure you talk to your financial institution about the expenses that you're thinking of utilizing the PPP, especially if you're doing a second draw, because you want to make sure you're not going to accidentally do some sort of lending that isn't part of that process. But rent, lease agreements, payroll, or like utilities, it's a lot of operational expenses are included in there. And I know when this first came about in the spring, a lot of people thought, okay, I can only spend it on my employees, which that's fair. And you can certainly do that. It's just there are other expenditures. And if you're really struggling as a business, it's good to talk those out with your lender, because maybe you want to also use it for rent and other items that are creeping up on you, even though you're able to keep your employee headcount up.
Well, I think that's important because a lot of the small businesses that we've talked to are folks that own their own business, and it's just them and they manage their business. Whether it's a small bookstore and they don't have a lot of employees, they're sole owner business owners, and there's, I think, a lot of concern about how to maximize the potential for them to get that loan forgiveness if they're the only person that they're paying. So I think that's really great advice. And with that, we're going to move over to Senator Martwick to talk about the explanation of the EIDL and ERTC and the IRS involvement in the payment of employees. So Rob, take it away.
Thank you, Commissioner. And yes, Chase, I want to ask a few questions about that interaction with these other tools that are available to businesses. So the first one is, can we use that PPP loan and an economic injury disaster loan jointly?
So yes, you can. And this was a long debate throughout the summer, but now we're here at the third round, and they seem to have figured out that you probably want to do both of these. So you should be, now remember, contact your lender as well, because this is another SBA product. And you want to make sure you're not taking on too much debt, but this is like a loan product, not in the same sort of guarantee or forgiveness product as the PPP program. But you can file for both of them. The difference is that the EIDL is a long-term, I would say, debt obligation. It's to provide 6 months of working capital. There are terms. I believe it's 3.75 APR for businesses, 2.75 for nonprofits. It's a 30-year. But you want to work through your financial institution to make sure that you need it, because it doesn't have the same forgiveness pieces as the PPP loan. But if you do, make sure that you understand your debt load, and you can take on both, but they can't be used for kind of the same purposes. So like, you want to make sure that you're working with your lender. A lot of the EIDL things go towards like healthcare benefits and fixed debt payments, but like it's working capital as opposed to the PPP, which does have some operational cost to it, but is more paychecks focused.
All right, excellent. Thank you for that. And so of course, there's another tool there, the employee retention tax credit. And again, the question would be, can businesses use both of these at the same time? And if so, how do they interact?
Okay, so this one is not SBA related, although you'll probably, if you talk to the SBA, they will mention it. You want to go to the IRS website if you want to have a discussion with this, or talk with your CPA. That would be a recommendation I have on this. Originally, you weren't supposed to use them at the same time, but this is like the PPP. This one has been adjusted multiple times. So make sure when you talk to your CPA or you go to the IRS website, you have the most recent information at the top. This is a tax credit, and eligible employers, and there's a long list of eligibility. It's a refundable tax credit against the employer share of Social Security equal to 70% of the qualified wages that they pay to employees after December 31st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021. So qualified wages are limited to $10,000 per employee per calendar quarter of 2021. So then the max ERC amount available is $7,000 per employee per calendar quarter for a total of $14,000 in 2021, because there's the 2 quarters there. Under a specific subject section of the Taxpayer Certainty Disaster Tax Relief Act of 2020, which is the one passed in December, an employer that is eligible for the employee retention credit can claim the ERC even if the employer has received the Paychecks Protection Program. They can claim the ERC on any qualified wages that are not counted as payroll costs in obtaining the PPP loan forgiveness. So you got to keep those separated. So my advice on this, because it gets complicated when you're working on the PPP side with the tax credit, is you should be talking with your financial institution, but you should also very much be talking with your CPA, because they're going to have a more holistic understanding of your finances, and they can make the decision on what should be covered on either side. I don't recommend an individual try to go do this on their own without talking to a tax professional and checking with their lender. I know that's not fun. You have to do a lot of different calls and things. It's just one of those things that because you have this tax piece plus the PPP, and rules had changed since the summer to now, I want to make sure that your accountant is very clear on why you'd be taking the employee retention credit.
All right, interesting. So obviously a lot of, be careful, proceed cautiously, but it sounds like it has the potential to provide a substantial amount of relief. So certainly something worth exploring anyway, but just make sure you're talking to the pros. So Chase, does the IRS, do they tax the PPP loans?
Okay, so let's talk about round 3, because that's what we're dealing with right now. So round 3 of the PPP loans will not be included in a company's taxable income. So if your loan is forgiven, the expenses paid with the proceeds of your loan will be tax deductible. That applied to the existing and previous PPP, but that's kind of relatively defined in this new round. So it's backward looking, but just know that that's relatively new with the 3rd round. Also, any income tax basis increase that result from your PPP loan will remain even if the PPP loan is eventually forgiven. So if there's some like threshold changes with your taxes that could impact you, I would just talk to your accountant before making, again, like when you're doing with the tax credit, just make sure that you're not going to rub up against some sort of threshold depending on what type of business you are.
Okay, and then, so I guess that will dovetail into my last question, which is, how should businesses pay their employees? Should they be, how do they use these, the PPP funds in order to do this? Should they be opening another banking account to track the funds, or is it okay to just accept them and intermix them with your other funds and pay for them generally?
So I'm not going to give a specific financial advice. I'm going to kind of, and I know I'm kind of waving around the question, but I'll tell why you might want to. separate into a separate business account, or you decided to keep it intermingled. A lot of financial institution, or a lot of businesses that have one business account keep everything in one pot that they can easily transfer over to their accountant to make sure that they're doing kind of just the general books of the business, and therefore don't like the idea of having multiple accounts, multiple draws with one bank, that sort of thing. And that's fine. A lot of businesses are doing that through one system, including their PPP. Some businesses have decided to just open up an account specifically for PPP. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. What I'm saying is the reason they do that is it's very easy to track specifically what transactions are happening from that account to what purchases. So to answer your first question, should I use PPP? How should I pay my employees? Well, PPP is designed to help you pay your employees. So if you're utilizing that expense from a separated bank account, and it's very clear that that's going into employee account costs, when it comes time for forgiveness, all of those are on one bank statement, essentially from one account. You don't have to kind of justify, well, I didn't use PPP here, but I did here, and that you can certainly do it that way. But a lot of businesses have found it easier. You have one account, everything on that statement should be PPP eligible. Give it to the accountant, give it to the lender. Here's all of that information. So, you can choose whatever you want. A lot of very organized people like it all in one account, and that's totally fine. But if that's not for you, your bank should be able, or your credit union should be able to separate it so you can keep track of those expenses.
All right. Well, thank you. That's very good advice, and appreciate the explanations on those. It sounds like there's really some great opportunities for businesses here. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Commissioner Degnen and to the next step in the program.
Thanks, Senator Martwick. Just as a follow-up, we did have a couple additional questions. One of those was, if I haven't used all the funds for my first PPP loan, can I apply for this round?
You should talk to your lender because there are some potential implications on taxes there. Remember, the second draw, you have to show a reduction as part of the eligibility. And you not drawing on some of the PPP could cause some eligibility concerns later when you're looking for forgiveness. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't qualify. You should just very carefully talk to your lender and have a clear, defined justification of why you haven't pulled that remaining. Okay. And there are reasons for it. It's just make sure you talk to your lender. I think the overarching thing is talk to your lender when you're having a question about some of these.
Be best friends with your lender. Got it. If I'm an owner of a small business, I'm using Chase Bank. Am I better off going through the SBA tool at Chase or choosing a smaller bank to apply for the PPP loan? And does the amount you get approved for vary by lender?
So there are hard and soft rules there. So just to put out my own general bias, because I am the bank commissioner here at Illinois, and then people would yell at me if I didn't probably acknowledge this. We traditionally regulate the smaller institutions. So obviously we're cheerleaders of the smaller institutions. I think a lot of community banks provide that very hands-on feel that a lot of the small businesses may feel need, because this is very complicated stuff. We just talked about all the different ins and outs here. Maybe you want that person that you think is hands-on. That being said, there are a lot of large institutions that have also been very strong on this, and they might provide a larger safety net on the back end, more bodies working on the specific program, and that might be good for you. A lender is going to dictate your PPP based on a couple of different factors. First, they're going to factor in your own ability on it. And if they're used to you as a business, they're probably going to be pretty honest with you about what they think your expenses could be and how that forgiveness would work. They're also going to be dictated by how many PPP loans they already have out the door. And the more of those, it could cause issues later on, potentially for a financial institution. We're really kind of done with that. I don't actually imagine that's going to run into too many people between now and by the time this expires. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Don't worry too much about the limit. Theoretically, the different institutions could provide more or less based on their own internal estimation about what they think you can do. But really, you should talk to who do you feel the most comfortable talking through the forgiveness aspect of this, because that's the real tricky part. So you want somebody, if you want a small bank that you feel like, hey, I know Dave at, First Bank of my town, and I just like him because I walk down the street and I know him pretty well. Great, go with them because you have that relationship. Or you're like, I really like all the bells and whistles that this large bank has that can kind of show where I'm at and that sort of thing. Great, go with them. That's totally fine too. It's just make sure, I think at this point, it's not so much the upfront stuff, it's the back end stuff. So make sure that from a customer service side, that's what you're looking at.
And then a few more questions. What about independent contractors who don't have a small business checking account?
Okay.
They are now included in this round of PPP?
They are included in PPP. Okay, so I would encourage you to go to the SBA website and go to the lender tool that we mentioned earlier, and they will help you find somebody that can help on those small business, those independent contractor piece. Same with sole proprietorships. A lot of people have that issue as well. There's a lot of CDFIs that are very heavily into this space that have tried really hard. And there's a lot of just general banks and credit unions that have just focused on trying to get new customers, quite frankly, as a result of this third round of PPP. So I would use that tool on the SBA piece because that's really kind of designed to help a lot of the people that currently are unbanked from their small business.
Can somebody who owns a small business, but their business has suffered throughout the pandemic, be on unemployment and then get the PPP loan at the same time?
So the owner is on unemployment and they're taking PPP for their own. There's a lot of, so I got to figure that out. So
that's the unpacking. Maybe we can just respond to that person at a later time if you feel like.
Yeah, let me take that back, because obviously with general employees, there's some issue with having them on unemployment and then trying to pay for their PPP. Like that's not on individual. I'm going to have to go back to talk to the SBA and make sure that I have the correct answer to that one.
Okay, well, I know that person signed up with their email, so we can circle back around. And then can sole proprietors, like attorneys who manage their own law firms or real estate brokers who manage their own business, they can still apply for the PPP, right?
Sole proprietorship should be eligible for PPP. Obviously, you need to do it on the correct expenses, but you should be able to do that. That's also faith-based organizations too. I get that question a lot. Make sure you understand that some of those churches and things also are eligible.
And then another person said they've heard that some of the businesses have applied to multiple lenders at the same time to see who comes through the fastest. They wanted to know if that is allowed or recommended.
That gets into a sticky question. I have heard that as well. Just know when you're doing multiple looks at credit, that can sometimes impact your credit score. A lot of these are not hard draws on your credit though, so you can make that determination on as well. I probably don't feel comfortable in giving you advice on whether or not that's the best way to do it. I do know that that's something that some people have done and have been successful at. So I think you should research your financial institutions to really know if that's the best way forward.
Great. Well, I think that exhausts the questions that I saw in the chat for the county. And then I was hoping that maybe Representative LaPointe and Senator Martwick could give some information if they feel comfortable sharing. The county has something called Next Street as a partnership that we've engaged with. And Next Street's basically this mission-driven firm dedicated to helping small businesses in our community. We first started to partner with them in 2018 to find a way to connect small businesses to consumers and connect small businesses with services. So we re-upped that partnership in 2020 as a result of Corona. And the county is offering free one-on-one counseling to businesses in the suburbs and Chicago through its Next Street partners. I'll put the link in the chat box, but you can also email me at district12@cookcountyil.gov, and I can send you the link on that. There is cookcountysmallbiz.org. I'll say that again, cookcountysmallbiz.org. And that includes a list of all available county resources for small businesses. I can drop that into the chat box as well. But in connection with those, if you need help in promoting your business online, if you need to figure out more about PPP or other types of loans or services from the feds or the state, we can connect you to some of those resources. And finally, as I know Representative LaPointe has mentioned on many other locations on other webinars, if you do find yourself with a need for job education and job training because you are now you have become unemployed during this time, there is in Cook County something called shycookwork.org. I'll put that into the chat. But that is a job training and placement program where you can find support and help to get education on new jobs and placement for jobs that have employers that are looking for employees to connect you two together. So that is a great resource from the county. As always, me personally and my office is always here to support you, constituent or not. You don't have to live in my district in order for me to help you. And so I'll turn now to Representative LaPointe and then Representative Martwick if they have some, discussion on support from the state apart from our excellent work by our Director of Banking, Chasse Rehwinkel.
Great. And actually, Chasse, I wanted to flip back and get one more question answered. And that is a question about churches or faith-based organizations that you mentioned at the end, because I think many of us were really taking in your excellent presentation and answers through the lens of small businesses. And so I was paying attention the whole time, but I extra paid attention when you said churches and faith-based organizations. I kicked off my day this morning having coffee outside, actually, with one of my wonderful friends who's a pastor right in Jefferson Park. So can you tell us a little bit more about how churches and faith-based organizations are eligible and are they eligible for the same things that small businesses would be eligible for?
So there's a great question because there's actually, I think, a separate and I'll have to double check on it, but there's a separate fact sheet for faith-based organizations from the SBA website. And it was a big question point back in April of 2020 when they were going through that. They are eligible. They're also eligible for the EIDL loan. So the SBA had carved it out. There are some limitations on the coverage of non-payroll employees, and it's just slipping on the top of my tongue right now. I think it's limited just slightly in terms of coverage, but the SBA actually has an entire fact sheet, I believe, on faith-based organizations and churches because of the demand. Originally, they were not going to be included, but then they were pulled in at the last moment with the SBA.
Terrific. That's super helpful. And we'll make sure we find that fact sheet that you're talking about and share it as we share resources as a follow-up to this event. Before I turn it over to my senator, since we're sort of recapping resources here, I will just acknowledge that it can be hard for individuals, families, and businesses to keep track of all the resources that are out there. All our offices try to play a role in interpreting, organizing, and then getting that information out there. I will leave people with perhaps a good thing, perhaps sometimes a frustrating thing, and that is resources are in flux. And part of that is because at the federal level and at the state level and at the county level, we are continually making approvals for things or passing laws, and then brand new resources become available. And my advice to follow and some of those resources would be to, sorry to, blow up your inbox, but if you get on elected officials' email lists, it can actually be really helpful. I'm sure many of you are. There's actually several older people that I follow because I just read them consistently, and sometimes I find resources I wouldn't otherwise see. And seeing things more than once because we're living in information overload times can be helpful as well. And I'll just give you one kind of quick example that is less related to businesses and more related to families and communities. And that is rental assistance for families that are struggling with paying their rent. We've always had some level of that throughout the pandemic, but there have been waves that have come through our various federal stimulus bills. And the stimulus bill that we passed at the very end of December, that rental assistance money for Illinois is not even out the door yet. We know there's a huge need, not quite out the door. It's getting out the door soon. And then with this next stimulus bill that we're poised to pass, there will be another wave of rental assistance. So my point there is the availability of resources is very often in flux. So I urge you to pay attention to certain places like state websites and email lists consistently over time. And that's the best way to get accurate information. Senator?
Sorry there, I had to take myself off mute. I'm trying to get my Zoom etiquette going there. So I at this point, I really don't have a whole lot to add, except that, the challenge in government, as long as I've been around it, is that government seeks to provide these programs, but our ability to communicate them to everyone is always a challenge. We don't have the resources to communicate everything we need to communicate to the people who need to hear it. And so I thank everyone for joining us on this. I would suggest that I know very few business owners, and I assume that's who we've got on the line listening tonight, who don't interact and intersect with other business owners. So share these resources with them, help us communicate that we have access to resources that can help you, and connect them here. We've got some information for you here today that I think is very beneficial, and make sure that if you know other businesses that are struggling, you help us, because we just don't have that ability to communicate to the extent that we would like to, or really even really need to. So, but reach out to those resources. Again, as the stimulus package looks like it's going to be passed through Congress. At $1.9 trillion is going to make their way through our states, and that could very well create other opportunities. So stay tuned, stay informed, connect with your Illinois and your county and your city government officials, and make sure that you're aware of what's going on. And so to that extent, I want to again thank Commissioner Degnen for hosting this and allowing us to join you. And thank you to my good friend Chase for joining us and giving us the expertise that we need for our business owners. It's really been it's been a great experience for me, and I already know compiling a list of businesses that I know that I'm going to reach out to personally and try and get them to take advantage of this.
And I think that if I could just real quickly, first, I did pass that fact sheet in the chat on the faith-based organization. So please take a look at that. But I also wanted to, since, you mentioned the stimulus stuff, here on the state level, and sometimes people are really struggling here, even with the check side. During this process, we've had 2 rounds of these stimulus checks that have gone out. And my office has worked with large banks to make sure for those people that, don't have a bank account and need that check, didn't have to go to a place that might have to charge them to cash that check because they don't have a bank account. Call these unbanked individuals, they have to go to a check cashing place and pay a percentage. We thought that was obviously ridiculous during this time period where people really need that money. So in the summer, we negotiated free checking for a few banks. In this last round, we negotiated for slightly more banks, and I'll give you those banks right now, because if this goes through like we say it will, I imagine that these same institutions would be willing to step up. And I encourage people, if they're really struggling, to contact them if they don't have a bank account. And those banks were Bank of America, First Midwest, Fifth Third, Huntington, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, and US Bank. Again, that is for individuals that might not have a bank account, that really can't afford having to cash their check and paying a little piece of that when every dollar matters. Those institutions during this entire crisis have provided free checking to non-customers. And if you have any other questions on that, please go to idfpr.com and follow our contact information, and we can try to find if there is a bank near you that can help you out. Can't promise it'll work every time, but we're committed to trying to help you out as much as possible.
Well, thank you very much, Chase, for being here tonight. You've done an excellent job explaining a really complex and layered issue to everybody. So we're grateful for your time and presence. Thank you to Senator Rob Martwick for being here and being present, as well as you, Representative LaPointe. And thank you to all the participants and people that are watching this. I can't stress enough, as Senator Martwick mentioned, that we do have great opportunities at the county, at the city, and at the state level of government to serve you. But really the hurdle for us is getting that information out. And while tonight's webinar is about COVID, we do have so many other types of programs and outreach efforts that we can get in touch with you about and support and help you with. We all have passion projects that we like to engage in, and mine personally is the environment, and we have so many other things. So please follow us on social media. That is a great opportunity to get to know what our next webinar will be about, or where else we'll be and what else we're doing in our wards, districts, and offices. So please do that, and thank you so much. And we'll see you next time, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. Bye.